something here? No, I'm good.
Gospel tract tells you how to go to heaven, how to have your sins forgiven. Yeah, I wish Christians had come to me when I was your age and given me the gospel. That's what I wish, and they didn't. Tells you how to go to heaven. That's happening today to little children just down the road, a few miles from here. You get one?
3,500 to 4,000 babies every day in this nation. That's what's happening. 63 million since 1973. It's far greater than the Holocaust that Hitler inflicted on the Jews. The loss of life, unbelievable.
Okay.
What do you think about that? Any thoughts on it? Do you have an opinion on baby murder? No. Just kind of try to stay neutral.
Have you ever seen that on the news? You ever seen this on the news? Or on the on the other side?
Like the imagery or anything? Yeah. Ever seen that type of imagery on the news? No.
It's a media blackout, that's why. I never saw it on the news growing up, and I watched a lot of TV. And I'm sincere when I say this. I grew up in the public school system like y'all, and no Christians ever did this for me. I wish Christians had done this for me, had shown me what's happening on my watch. And I wasn't a Christian. But you don't have to be a Christian to care. You have to be a Christian to go to heaven, but you don't have to be a Christian to care about mass murder happening on your watch. And I wish I had learned about that when I was in your shoes. And I didn't know about it until I was 22. What's that?
It's for everybody to understand.
Is what?
God is for everybody to understand. That's what you're saying.
So are you a Christian yourself?
Yeah.
You are?
I mean, I'm not specifically saying like I'm any denomination.
Yeah.
But I am for God, yeah.
So what's your name?
D'Angelo.
Angelo?
D'Angelo.
D'Angelo, not Nicholas.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
I'm Quentin.
D'Angelo.
Nice to meet you, D'Angelo.
Yeah, and you have thoughts on the afterlife? On if you were to die today, would you go to heaven, hell? Any idea?
I mean, always hope for greater. Always hope for a greater being. You know what I'm saying? God is always great. That is what it is. That's what we're here for. To show His way. You know what I'm saying? That's the main thing, honestly.
Well, you know, it's through Jesus Christ alone that any one of us will be saved. That's why we're doing this. Not for ourselves, but for Jesus Christ, the glory of God. And aren't many preachers doing this, unfortunately, but you're very fortunate to have Christians in your city, in your area that care about you. I'm not trying to say it's about us. No, God's put us here. I'm not local, but God has put me here with brothers to come to bring Christian education to schools that teach the opposite of Christianity, and that teach there is no God, that human life has no value or very little value, and we all have value because we're all made in God's image, right? And so do these little babies that are murdered every day. And people say, "Oh, that's gruesome." Yeah, it is gruesome. I've never seen a murder that wasn't gruesome. Just like the images in the Nazi death camps, all the bodies that are stacked up, that's gruesome to look at, right? It's black and white, so it's not as bloody, in a sense. But we got to show these images so that people can, like, I cannot believe this is happening. What can I do about it? And like Emmett Till. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Emmett Till. In a nutshell, Emmett Till, he was murdered in the 1950s for supposedly whistling at a white woman. He was a black man, 15-year-old boy. And he was beaten to death, so you couldn't even recognize him. Emmett Till, look it up, Emmett Till. there are pictures of him, his mom, after seeing what they did to her boy, she demanded an open casket. They're going to do a closed casket because of how badly he was beaten to death. You couldn't recognize him. So his mom demanded, I want an open casket. I want the world to see what they did to my baby. So that they had an open casket. And it's it's like...
You can see those pictures online.
Yeah, you can look it up.
Coffin.
Emmett Till, open casket. It's horrible what they did to him.
It's hard to recognize him as even being a human because they beat him so badly.
A 15-year-old boy that was beaten to death. And that's what we're doing to babies every day. Every single day. Thousands of babies every day. And almost no one does anything about it.
But we'd have that same approach that Emmett Till's mother did. She wanted to see the horrors of what they did to her baby. So we bring these around. As gruesome as it is to look at, this is what they're doing to babies here in the United States. 3,500 to 4,000 every day. That's as big as 9/11 every single day.
That's more than 9/11.
More than 9/11.
Not to minimize 9/11, but this is more than 9/11 every day. Way more than 3,000 little babies. And so that we're simply, by showing these images, we are bypassing the media blackout, and we are opening up the casket on the babies. Just as Emmett Till's mom demanded an open casket for her son, we're having an open casket for these babies. And because that's what Christians do. They don't stay silent in the midst of a national genocide. They stand up, they speak out. And you don't see many Christians doing this, right? I never saw Christians doing this growing up, ever. Like what we're doing now, I didn't even know this existed when I grew up. Never saw a street preacher. I never saw anyone do this at my high school, like I said. Shame on them for not loving their neighbor as themselves. But God saved us, and He gave us a concern and a love for our men, including yourselves. And even those we don't know. You don't know us, we don't know you, but you're our fellow neighbor, just as these babies are. And you and these children and us, we have the same value before God. But we dehumanize these children because that's what the culture has taught us. These aren't human beings. That's what that's what the Nazis taught in Nazi Germany. Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, they don't have any value. It's okay to murder them legally.
They were parasites.
Parasites, yeah. Isn't that awful? But did you know that everything Hitler did in Nazi Germany was legal? Did you know that? Everything. Hitler did not break the law. They didn't break the law because Hitler had changed the law. They broke God's law, the ultimate law, that says you shall not murder. But Hitler made the law and they followed the law. And in our country, it's not lawful to murder babies, it's a violation of the Constitution, but we do it anyway, right? Because we have turned our back against God. And the result is 50 years of mass murder. No one in sight.
And the reason we come out to reach younger people like you is, I think, me, for instance, I know we've all got different reasons for doing what we do. I do it in obedience to God, but also as I was, when I was a young man in school, back then it was during the Cold War. So Russia, and the United States were at war with one another. It was a Cold War, but the nuclear weapons turned on each other. We used to go through the drills, the nuclear drills, where we would get underneath the desks. And we lived every day in fear that somebody was going to push the red button, and it was going to end for all of us. But I remember back when I was in school that they taught about the Berlin Wall. You guys heard of the Berlin Wall? That used to be through Germany. And it separated families from one another, East Germany and West Germany. And I remember thinking at the time, this is such a horrible thing, that they built this wall, communism had built this wall, and they locked people in, and they separated loved ones from their other loved ones right on the other side of the city. And, at the time I thought, what could I do to change things? And I thought, I'm just a young person, I cannot make a difference.
Yeah. A lot of people think that.
That's what I thought. But you know what? You guys are our future. You guys are the future generations. If you guys have got a voice, you guys can vote, you guys can speak out, you guys can reach out to your peers, you can lift up your voices and let them know that, hey, these are our neighbors. 3,500 to 4,000 of these neighbors every day. Who knows? They could be doctors. They could be politicians. They could change the scope of this nation. They could be the ones with the cure for cancer.
But even if they're going to live under a bridge their whole life, they're still made in God's image.
Still got value.
We're not, our value is, we have value because we're made in God's image. Not because we're going to be a president or governor or we're going to discover the cure for cancer. We might, but we're made in God's image. But under Hitler and Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union, they didn't see they were atheists. Well, Hitler was not an atheist. Joseph Stalin was. But they decided who was worth living and who was not worth living. And if you weren't worth living, you're a parasite and you had to go. That's what happens when people forget God. Human life has no value unless you're productive. But you don't see that anywhere in the Bible. Where we get our value from what I can contribute to society, our culture. No, it's that we're made in God's image. And that's a big difference between what atheism, communism teaches, what Christianity, the Bible, teaches. And I mean, these are all things I've learned since God saved me. I didn't know any of this. And how many of you are familiar with American Pie, the movie franchise, American Pie? What's that? American Pie.
Are you guys familiar with that?
I mean, that goes back 27 years, but
it's been a while.
I mean, maybe
I wouldn't recommend watching.
Yeah, it basically taught guys especially to lose their virginity before they turned 18. That's what I grew up with, and I used to have that mindset. By God's grace, I didn't lose my virginity because I was too quiet, but many of you have. But probably not all of you, but many of you have. And but the way God designed it was Jesus said, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, so that they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. I'll have to get one. Oh, you okay? So right there, God talks about how, and the Lord Jesus Christ reiterated it, this is how God designed it. Not two men, not two women. One man and one woman come together, become one flesh, not to get divorced, but to stay together. And do any of you know the first command in all the Bible? The first command. It's in the book of Genesis. The first command, it's okay, I didn't know it until just years of studying the Bible. The first command in the Bible is be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And God, He repeated this 4 times. He said this 4 times in the first 9 chapters in Genesis. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. He said that to Noah, or he said that to Adam and Eve. He repeated it to Noah and his family after they came off the ark, after the flood. So he wanted them to pay attention. He said it 4 times. But what do we do in this country? Well, you have husbands and wives that leave each other when things get hard. They leave behind their children. They take birth control pills so they don't have children. They murder their babies. We just came from the place before here where babies are being murdered. They're still being murdered right now, probably. This is happening to children right now, in a few miles down the road.
Florida Avenue, right here in Lakeland.
And right down the road. We hear about school shootings, right? When they happen, 20 children get shot to death, gunned down. Well, I'm not sure how many, but
About 12 to 20 a day.
12 to 20. An equivalent of a school shooting is happening down the road, and almost no one's doing anything about it. And so, I mean, these are emergency situations where people are dying and going to hell. Babies are being mass murdered. And it's happening because we forgot God. We have forgotten God. And here's a little bit of a history lesson for you. And what I'm telling you, I've learned this just by studying, and because I didn't know any of this years ago. I was dumb as a box of rocks. When I was in your shoes in high school, I was dumb as a box of rocks, knew nothing. I knew how to multiply, but are you familiar with the name Alexander Solzhenitsyn? I'd be shocked if any of you were. Well, you're familiar with the Soviet Union, right? Okay. How much do you know about the Soviet Union? Socialist, Marxist. And maybe I'll share some history with you on that. Basically, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I think he was the most famous Russian author in the 20th century. He spent 8 years in a Soviet gulag under Joseph Stalin. When he came to America after he was released, they asked him, here in America, they asked him, what happened to your country? What happened to Russia? You know what he said? What he said? Exactly. He said, we forgot God. And he's right. Because in Russia, Tsar Nicholas, he was the last Tsar in Russia. He and his whole family were murdered. Vladimir Lenin took over the Bolshevik Revolution. He founded the Soviet Union, Vladimir Lenin. And what happened in the Soviet Union? At least 20 million murdered, dead. There was a Wall Street Journal article that said 100 years of communism, 100 million dead. The Wall Street Journal, not a Christian source. 75 years of communism and 100 million dead. So that's what happens when you forget God. You get tyrants, dictators like Joseph Stalin, like Hitler, that murder millions of people. Because when you're in charge and you don't care about God, say there is no God, then you do it, you make it up as you go, right? If you want people dead, they're going to die. So I mean, that's what happens when you forget God. When you say there is no God, I am the law. That's what Hitler did. That's what Joseph Stalin did. I am the law. I make it up. And the result was, in the Soviet Union under the Vladimir Lenin, 1,200 concentration camps. I think throughout the Soviet Union, at least 1,200. And Joseph Stalin, he even had probably the most brutal concentration camp, or gulag, was on what was called Cannibal Island. I was reading about this yesterday. Cannibal Island. Within a month, about 4,000 or 5,000 people died. Many of them were cannibalized because they had no food, so they ate each other. And they cut limbs off of people just to eat. They tried to swim to the nearby island just to survive, and that many of them drowned. We look it up, Cannibal Island. And the atrocities there were so horrible that even the Soviets and Stalin, they knew something was wrong here. Look that up, Cannibal Island. It's horrific. Even those who aren't Christians recognize this is horrible. How could we allow this to happen? When you forget God, you get things like that. You get the final solution in Nazi Germany, right? The final solution. That doesn't happen under Christians. It happens under those who say there is no God, or who cares about God. So I mean, that's a lot to take in. Just some history for you. You left school today thinking, okay, I'm done with school. Nope. We brought school to you today to teach you about Jesus Christ, the Bible, communism, Marxism, the Soviet Union.
She knew Allison, she knew Chelsea, she knew you.
Baby murder. Yeah. What's that?
I'm not even in school. That's the funny part.
Well, you are right now. And free school. They'll take your money. We don't want your money. We don't.
Some of this is college level.
Yeah, it's
College level.
some of this I've learned this year. I'm telling you some of the stuff I've learned just by researching in the last month or two.
Interesting. History teaches us a lot. The more we study history, the more we learn the evils that have happened in history, and we learn not to make that same repeat history again.
And that's exactly what we're doing right here.
The photo I was showing, I've actually got the sign in my truck, but there was.
That's what we're doing.
Let me see.
We're repeating history right here.
I'll show it to you guys on here. So.
Sobering.
Little history lesson for y'all.
People don't like to look at this, but what do some of you, I know because I used to do this, watch horror movies, right? Blood, gore, sex, violence. You play Grand Theft Auto or violent video games. I used to do all that. So it's like, I don't see a problem with showing you what we do to babies every day, because you see blood and gore on TV at home or on the video games.
So you've seen that before, seen that imagery before? That man was a slave back in antebellum America, so early 1800s.
Look at his back.
See how badly scarred it is?
Look at that.
Where the slave holders had beaten him so badly. Now you guys have probably heard of Frederick Douglass.
By the way, Frederick Douglass was conceived in rape. He was conceived in rape.
That's a good side fact.
People want to ask, what about the case of rape? Well, if you support murdering babies conceived in rape, you'd support murdering Frederick Douglass, the most famous abolitionist and one of the most famous in the 19th century.
Man too. If you ever get the chance to read the memoirs of Frederick Douglass, he was a very intelligent man. And he was a slave. He was a slave at one time, and he was a rebellious slave that actually stood up to a violent slaveholder. And refused to be beaten. He'd had enough, and eventually got his freedom. And the reason he learned how to read from his slaveholder's wife, and he was listening to her and learned how to read by listening to her, and he got a hold of some books. He realized the importance of reading, and that the slaveholders did not want them to have books. And he got a hold of some books, and he taught himself how to read and learning from her. And then eventually got his freedom. Very smart man, wrote his own memoirs, became an abolitionist, stood up against slavery, and went around the nation, not with this man in particular, but he went on speaking tours around the nation. I had read about him where he met up with John Brown in Chicago, and him and John Brown were close friends. And John Brown had tried to recruit him to go
to Harper's Ferry.
Help him out in Harper's Ferry, and Frederick Douglass rather refused to go because he wasn't looking to be an activist and taking a more violent role. He wanted to speak, and he wanted to, speaking engagements. But he was raising awareness through taking slaves like this that had been beaten to show people the horrors of slavery. Now, you guys have heard of the Dred Scott case by any chance? In the Supreme Court? So that was the Supreme Court opinion on March 6, 1857. The Supreme Court passed down an opinion, because Dred Scott was a slave, so was his wife and his children. He was around 60 years old. He actually died the year after the Dred Scott case.
Hey, I'm sorry about earlier yelling at y'all. I just don't really I don't gotta go past seeing blood and stuff like that.
Okay.
But I respect that y'all are going up and trying to spread the word, but it was just unexpected.
Okay.
Well, thank you for the apology. That takes humility.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So Dred Scott, he was a slave. So was his wife and his children, and he was trying to get freedom. He wanted his freedom, like any one of us would, And the Dred Scott, the Supreme Court, in 7 out of the 9, came back with a decision. And the majority opinion of the court was this man did not deserve his freedom because he was black.
Was not a human being.
He wasn't afforded the same rights as the rest of us. So what they did, they dehumanized him because of the color of his skin. And then in 1973, they did the same thing here in the United States. So Roe versus Wade, you guys heard of that case. January 23rd, 1973, they deemed that the child within the womb was not afforded the same rights as the rest of us because they were dependent on their mother. And ironically, they determined that Jane Roe had the right, the freedom to kill her baby. They based that upon the 14th Amendment, that she had the liberty because she was a citizen of this country. But ironically, the 14th Amendment also states that citizens have the right to life and liberty.
Yeah, the 5th and 14th Amendments say no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's the Constitution. So when this is happening here, a few miles away, and throughout America, throughout Florida. It's a violation of the Constitution. What's that?
We don't do this because we want anything from you guys. We're not trying to convert you guys over to anything. We're not trying to get you guys to come to church with us. We just want to raise awareness. Well, we go to different fellowships. Yeah, I go to fellowship down on Waimama, and Brother Nicholas, he travels the United States doing this. I'm a born-again, Bible-believing Christian, so kind of like pre-denominational is what I call it.
We say that the pre-born are not citizens yet. But what does God say? Yeah, not just black lives, all lives. It's about Jesus Christ. But let me ask you this. I didn't used to know this. I grew up in the public school system. I was dumb as a box of rocks, and I don't want to offend you all with this, but some of you're just like me. I don't want to say you're all dumb, but some of you're just like me when I was in your shoes. Hopefully, some of you are smarter, but
Not him.
not him. Oh, well, class is in session, so hopefully you'll get a little smarter by listening.
Unfortunately, I did.
But do you all know what the chief?
He can forgive you that. He claims you that.
Do you all know what is the purpose? And it's an easy answer, but what is the purpose that we're all here? Do any of you know why you exist on this earth? Oh yes, that's.
Enjoy God's gift.
You're close.
That's our
That-
That's a really cool name, D'Angelo.
The chief end of man.
God wanted to make his world more divine. I don't know.
Well, listen up. The chief end of man. The reason that we all exist is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever.
Okay.
That's why we exist. And most people are not living to glorify God. I used to be one of them. When I was in your shoes, I wasn't living to glorify God. I was wasting my life away. But that's why we exist. To glorify God and enjoy Him forever.
Sorry.
So if you're not doing that, then you are wasting your life as right at the moment as I was when I was in your shoes. But you don't have to continue to do that. But you don't have to continue to waste your life.
My money is Nick money.
The King Solomon, I don't know how many of you know the Bible at all, but I didn't used to know the Bible at all. But then God saved me, and I've read the Bible since. King Solomon. If you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon was the richest earthly king who ever lived.
I'll be right back, brother. I'm gonna go to the truck and grab something.
Okay. King Solomon, he had it all. You know how many wives King Solomon had?
12.
700 wives.
What?
Right? Yeah. Look at Chronicles. He had 700 wives, 300 concubines. He'd make most men in this country blush. And King Solomon, he had all the gold, everything at his disposal. But you know what King Solomon said at the end of his life? At the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, the Old Testament, he said, the conclusion when all has been heard is fear God and keep His commandments. That's what he said. He didn't say get all, have all the sex you can, get all the women you can, get all the gold, all the silver. No, he said fear God and keep His commandments. That was the what the richest earthly king who ever lived, who had it all. That's what he said. So we should take heed to that, because King Solomon, he wasted a lot of his life on women, on sex, on accumulating things when God said don't do this. So we should take heed to what God said through him. And so it's like, what are you living for? Are you living for God's glory, or are you living for temporal pleasures, sin? Living for sin? Are you living for sex? A lot of people are your age. And yes, sex is pleasurable, very pleasurable, otherwise people wouldn't do it. But God instituted sex for marriage, right? Today people laugh at that. You know, we can't control ourselves, we can't have self-control, we gotta have sex. I tell them, I'm still a virgin to this day, and I didn't grow up with God. I wasn't Christian growing up, and I still didn't have sex. It can be done, you can have self-control, it can be done. But in this country, we think we cannot have self-control, right? Why do we think that? Because this culture teaches, well, yeah, it's cool to have sex, right? How many of you know who Will Chamberlain is?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, he claimed that he had sex with 20,000 women. Yes.
Wait, how many?
20,000. 20,000. It's like, how is that even possible, right? He had it all. He was once considered the greatest basketball player in the world. And he boasted that he had slept with 20,000 women. But you know what he said at the end of his life? He said that basically he'd been happier if he just had one. I think that's what he said. You know, just one. You don't need 20,000. But
hey, any of y'all, would you like a free bite?
what's that?
Where y'all going? Thank you.
You're welcome. How about you, young lady? Anybody like
You're talking very low, I can hear.
Y'all here about abortion, right?
Yes, but I'll
Yeah,
also
about pizza here?
the gospel with anybody that'll listen.
You're going to, or you did?
Questions, yep.
You did, okay.
Ask yours first.
I have a question
Okay.
for both of y'all. Why do y'all do this? Just flat out. Why do y'all do
The number one reason is to glorify God.
Okay.
That's why. It's to glorify God. And because we care about your old souls. And
That's the two greatest commandments. Yeah, that really sums up both
So y'all
of them.
are pro-life?
we're abolitionists.
What does that mean?
Oh, thank you for asking. Good question. It's
Abolitionist.
abolition basically means the removal of evils from society. So you can see my eyes. We're seeking the removal of evils from society. I'm not saying that baby murder or prostitution or drugs are all going to be removed. Just like even if you make something illegal, people are going to still do it. They're going to do it less because they don't want to be punished. But But that's what it means to abolish things.
So I believe in God, but if I believe in Satan, would y'all be mad?
No? No, I would just give you the gospel. No, I'm not like,
Right.
Well, I'm telling you now, if they don't want to force Bible or gospel on them,
no, we don't shove anything down people's throats. They're free to walk away. They don't have to listen. I tell that to people all the time. If you don't want to listen, you can walk away. But if we didn't bring this good news to people, we would be hateful. How many of you are familiar with Penn Gillette? Penn Gillette. Yeah, look him up. He's a famous atheist magician. You can look him up on YouTube. Penn Gillette. He's asked, referring to Christians, he said, "How hateful do you have to be to believe that everlasting life is possible and not tell people that?" An atheist magician says this. I agree with him. If we didn't share the gospel with people, we'd be hateful. If we hated you, we wouldn't be here doing this. We wouldn't give people the gospel.
So that's what they call you.
We would stay home and do what was more comfortable. Because I wasn't comfortable coming to the school today. I didn't want to do this.
did they force you all to come to the school?
Oh no, who's they?
Yeah, that's good.
Like the people who work there at the school.
Oh no, they don't want to. They don't want us to come. They want us to stay away, But what's that?
Do y'all want me to be totally honest?
Please be honest.
I feel like doing it in front of a school is not going to do anything. We're probably not listening, and we're teenagers, so we're not going to have a say in it.
Well, it looks like you are listening, even if you don't agree. It seems like you are listening.
I have my opinion. A lot of people don't want to say their opinion, but I'm saying my
feeling
opinion.
good.
I do.
Yeah.
I use my opinion out even if it's the wrong fucking thing. And I'm saying I feel like it's not one, y'all will get shut up, Devin. One, y'all will get backlash for it. Two, there's already a lot of people who don't like it. Doing it in front of Lakeland High School.
We believe that.
Well,
They didn't like Jesus either.
yeah, like if you read.
It's like Jesus, we just don't want to hear it from y'all. To be honest, we hear about it all the time from people. But doing it in front of a school with like flyers and everything, it's the best idea.
You hear it from people doing the same thing we're doing. You're hearing that from other people.
I go to church every day. I have a
Are
Bible at home.
you Catholic or?
I do everything at home. I just feel like it's not best to do it at school because it's like it's us. Are we basically listening? I don't mind him.
Some of you are. Some of you are. Most may not, but some of you are listening. And what did God say to Ezekiel? God told Ezekiel, go and talk to them, whether they listen or not. And at one point he said, they're not going to listen to you, go. So even if nobody listens, we still are commanded to go and share it, tell them, warn them. And if we don't warn you all, in Ezekiel chapter 3 and chapter 33, your blood will be on our heads if we don't warn you. But if we warn you and you reject it, your blood will be on your heads. But we have to warn you, the watchmen. And so we don't want your blood to be on our heads, so we have to warn you. Whether you hate it, reject it, accept it. And again, why do we come to a high school? Because I wish Christians had come to my high school 20 years ago, but they didn't. That's why. Would I have how would I have responded? I don't know, because it didn't happen.
And this is a vital stage too. I know I was sexually active at 15.
What?
So it's a vital stage, especially for young ladies that get pregnant in high school. Unfortunately, many times parents will say, "You're going to get an abortion."
Yeah.
And it's good. It's good for a young lady to stand up and say, "No, I'm not getting an abortion. I'm not murdering my baby." And us as abolitionists, we don't just care for the babies; we care for the mothers as well.
Care for everybody.
We go out, there's women that we're financially helping that decided to keep their babies.
We care about everybody. Yeah.
I mean,
We stand by our word.
there's like different instances where we should or shouldn't. Like rape, or like if you're not financially stable.
You know what you do in the case of rape? You put the rapist to death.
Usually people don't go that way. Like court and stuff. They don't usually side with the
Well, we need to find the rapist if you can, put him to death. a public execution. That will deter. If we did more public executions, you think people are going to commit that crime if they're going to be
King Josiah
murdered, or not murdered but killed in public while people are watching? We need to do public executions again, just like they did in the old days, because people are going to do it less crime if they're going to be executed publicly and embarrassed, humiliated with people watching.
Well, let's say they don't do that.
Other ones.
Don't do what?
Are they still together?
Well, then what we have in America, rampant crime. You have people that get sent to jail for 5 years, even for violent crimes, and they get set free, which is crazy.
One child that's Christian.
We should be, not everybody, but rapists should be put to death, and you love the mother and her child. And Jesus said, greater love has no man than this, than that one laid down his life for his friends. How much more should a mother lay down her life if necessary for her baby? Because there's no human relationship in this world that is closer or greater than a mother and a child, a bond that is stronger than between her mother and her child. And how much of the ultimate betrayal in this world is when a mother turns her back on her child by taking him to Planned Parenthood or any other murder mill, abortion mill, and hiring an assassin, an abortionist, to murder her baby. That is the greatest betrayal that exists.
I don't think like a mother would want to live with a rape baby. If I got raped, I wouldn't want to live with all of this shit.
Well, you don't want to make, because when a girl or a woman is raped, she's already a victim. We don't want to encourage her to victimize her child. You don't need, there's already one victim. We don't want to make two victims of that violent crime.
Baby can't even see it. He can't even like register a thought.
Yeah, and that's all the more reason to protect that baby, because the baby, you're the most vulnerable you are in life is when you're in the womb. Because right now, if someone came out here to try and kill us all, every one of us could run away. We could try to run away, right? We could hide, to somewhere so we don't get shot. The baby can't do that. And if someone came over here to shoot us, try to kill us, then you have people here that would try to defend you. That might, the Christians here, we would give our lives if necessary to protect you. The baby's in the womb. The vast majority of people in this country either couldn't care less or they're actively supporting it. When we were at the murder mill earlier, the abortion mill, there were up to 4 people there. They were there to make sure that babies got murdered. And so in this country, you have people shouting, and even in the streets, "My body, my choice." And then what they mean is murder babies. That's what they mean. It's a euphemism for murder babies, as many as you want. But in the case of rape, it's like, okay, people say, I don't want to look at, they say, my rapist baby the rest of my life. I ask them, would you rather look at the face of a murderer in the mirror every day for the rest of your life, knowing that you were victimized, but you chose to victimize your baby to death? Because if you murder your baby, then you're going to be looking in the mirror at a murderer the rest of your life. You made that choice to murder your baby. Yes, you were victimized, but you could have turned a tragic situation into a beautiful situation by loving your baby. That rapist dehumanized you, and now you're dehumanizing your baby to death. People don't think about that. They always want to say, murder the baby. No, put the rapist to death, love the baby, and let Christians, if necessary, come alongside the woman or girl, love her and her baby. That's what we should do. Because Jesus said to deny yourself and take up your cross daily. So who's being denied when we murder a baby, whether it's in the case of rape or people have a one night stand or they just have sex and they don't want to be responsible? They're denying the Lord Jesus Christ, and they're denying that baby his life. They're taking what Jesus said to deny yourself, turning it upside down. No, Jesus, I'm not going to deny myself. I'm going to deny you, and I'm going to deny that baby. That's what they're doing.
Hope y'all know I do not like y'all.
We love you.
We love you with the truth.
We actually talked to one of your classmates earlier. She was, her mother was raped, and she was a product of rape. So that's a good testimony about how her mother loved her enough to let her have life,
And again, Frederick Douglass, we were talking about him earlier, he was conceived in rape.
My wife's cousin, my wife's aunt was raped when she was in her teens. And she had the baby. And so my wife's aunt Margie had her daughter, Margie had her daughter Angie. So my wife's cousin Angie was a product of rape. But her and her mother were very, very close, and I don't think there's a day that went by that Margie wished that she would have aborted or killed her daughter Angie. You know, it's a lot of cases the baby. In the case of rape, the baby is a form of healing for the mother. You know, to have gone through that.
But what healing is there if a guy chose to dehumanize you and victimize you? Thank you for listening, Nicholas. Yeah.
D'Angelo. Yep. Quentin. Yep.
Quentin, thank you guys so much for
Yeah. Here, check out.
Why are y'all still here?
Here's a.
I'm playing.
Check out this website, abolishhumanabortion.com. Check that out. One of the reasons that I do this, one of the reasons, is because a child in my family was murdered, and I didn't know about it until a few years later, and that hurts to this day, and it hurts me that people want to support murdering children, but we must do this, not because it's fun or easy, because it's not, but people get emotional, they get angry. I mean, I've been assaulted before for doing stuff like this, which is a fine. You know, abolitionists of slavery, they were hated. People hated them.
They did.
People, Elijah Lovejoy, he was shot to death for doing this in the 1830s. They burned down his warehouse where he printed an abolitionist newspaper, and they shot him in the chest like 5 times. And today, this is the injustice that's happening in our country, and we got to stand up. People like say, "You're a man, you got no right to speak up about this," and I say, precisely because I'm a man, I have the duty to do what I'm doing, because I know that people are being mass murdered in my culture, the most innocent, the most helpless, the most vulnerable, the most abandoned, and as a man, I have a duty to protect them. And I didn't get to share this with y'all earlier, but do you know what a real man is? What the duty of a real man is? What is a man?
Protect their family.
Yeah. Real men are providers and protectors of women and children. They don't murder babies. They protect babies, and they protect. If a guy came in here to shoot us all, a real man would stand up and give his own life if necessary to protect any one of us.
I wouldn't hesitate to protect you guys.
A coward would go run and say, I don't want to get shot. That's what a coward would do. Our nation's full of cowards. They go to Planned Parenthood, have their baby murdered, and then continue to have sex outside of marriage. And so that's how we bring these things to you. Because we live in a nation where there's not many real men. A nation where aren't many Christians, a lot of bad theology. And so, I mean, we've given you a lot to think about today. You've been kind of drinking from a fire hydrant.
Really?
You can drink it from the fire hydrant. Yeah.
Oh, really?
You've been given a lot of information.
Yeah.
That's a lot to take in.
It's a lot to take in. And so, I mean, really, yeah, think about all these things and know that we share it because we care about you.
But you know, it's almost like drinking from a fire hydrant because there's a lack of it. Nobody's talking about it. People, the reason they don't want to talk about it is because it's so controversial.
Yeah, I mean, you saw how they responded, right?
Yeah, you see how people don't want that reaction. People don't want to offend somebody with their views, so they just don't talk about it. But it's something that we need to talk about.
Because no one else talks about it. I mean, again, when I found out about this Holocaust when I was 22, you know how many people talked about it? Try this. 0. No one. The churches I went to never addressed, never talked about. Not when I was there. So that's what I'm doing. That's what we're doing. Talking about it because nobody else is. Hardly anybody.
Yeah.
So we gotta talk about it if we love our neighbor as ourselves. So please, think about these things.
Yes.
And I think you gave us your name earlier, but I don't quite. Jade, okay. And your name?
And Josiah.
Josiah.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah. So, think through these things. And do you have a Bible, Josiah?
I do.
You do? Okay. You read it?
Yeah. Like, not as much as I should, but like I pick it up whenever I feel like I'm struggling or something, or I need to look at it. I just sometimes just feel like I need to read it. Like maybe once or twice a month. I should probably be reading it more, but...
Are you a Christian?
Yeah.
Well, read it every day. Christians read the Bible every day, right?
Think about what Jesus said in the Lord's Prayer is to give us this day our daily bread. You know, it's this is our daily bread. It sustains us. I mean, you wouldn't neglect your flesh every day. You feed it every day. Same way you need to feed your spirit every day. I mean, even if it's just reading. I mean, you need to read through the entirety of Scripture, but Proverbs, there's 31 of them, 31 chapters. So you could even just read one chapter of Proverbs a day and be getting fed the Word of God. So it's a good place to start, you know. More so.
Well, you all take care, okay? Have a good day.
You too.
Thanks for listening.
God bless y'all.